a nice cosy car and a shirt and tie. A lot of these people hasn't. They've got to rely on public transport or other people, including the word safety, like that manager said. And by the way, I am going on that hunger strike, you go ahead, I promise you. I need to lose some weight.
Okay, next question. Let's get to one down here, shall we? Yes, okay. We'll go around the front. Just bear with me, I did my Achilles the other day. Hang on a second. Here we come. Question from you, sir.
Yeah, I'm Peter Chambers, and I was born in Coventry. I was born near the station, and I used to live in Village Street, which is only a stone's throw from Spinecock. My mother and father came from Derbyshire and Lincolnshire, so I think I'm a typical Coventry kid, and I think my opinions are just as relevant as anybody else's. Oh, no, I'll hold it, it's all right. Right, the question, I've got a number of questions. The Rico cost 113 million to build. I think the council and the Higgs charity put in 10 million each. 10 million was received from the Tesco, I believe, as a sweetener. Where did the other 62 million come from? Was it regional, national, or European grants, or loans from somewhere? And how much did CCFC put in?
The numbers are, well, thank you for the question. And by the way, everybody's opinion's relevant, Peter. In the instant that you're talking about 113 million, there is a breakdown. It's broken down, so there was money from the various West Midlands enterprise zones, for example. 62 million was generated by selling part of the land to Tesco's. So the council bought the contaminated land for between 13 and 18 million, sold a portion of it off for 62. Now, there were lots of grants available because the area needed to be decontaminated. So ultimately, what was left was a shortfall of about 22 million, 23 million, and that was backfilled with a loan. Ultimately it was equity from Coventry City Council, but then they backfilled that with a loan from Yorkshire Bank, now Clydesdale Bank.
That's the 14 million, is it?
No, that was subsequent. So on the 15th of January 2013, the council decided to lend to ACL 14.4 million.
Right. Another question. I believe when the negotiations were going in reference to the takeover by Sisu, I think there was talk about Sisu buying half the stadium, if not eventually all of the stadium. Was there an agreement or an understanding at that time? And what figures did the council or Higgs charity say they wanted for the ground? And why didn't Sisu renegotiate the terms of the rental agreement at the time of the takeover? Why don't you ask ACL to offer Sisu the same terms as Preston Haskell IV to buy the charity's half?
Peter, you've made three very good points there. So the first thing is you're not buying a stadium. When I said this before, the concrete, the bolts and the rest of it is worth nothing. Actually, that has a negative value because you've got to build in the cost of taking it down. The real value is actually the business inside it. So, for example, the cash flows that business throws off ultimately is what the business is worth. On the 19th of June, then the Higgs agreed with Sisu to sell their stake for an amount of monies, and the council also agreed not to veto that particular transaction on the 2nd of August, and the details of that trade are as follows. What we will do, if you take out the debt for the bank, so Sisu, we're going to buy the Yorkshire Bank debt and then discharge it, so that would disappear. Then, in exchange for doing that, then the council would give a 125-year lease, which actually creates value for everybody. Now, for whatever reason, the relationship broke down and that deal wasn't completed. It got to heads of terms. So they were signed heads of terms. You talk about, could it be renegotiated? Well, actually, it was always moving away from the Higgs and the council. Why? Because when the due diligence was being done and BDO were going through the numbers at ACL, the numbers made the business look pretty rotten, actually. And if there was going to be any renegotiation, it would have been away from the original numbers that were agreed down. And I think that is the point that perhaps the Higgs may have found unacceptable. I don't know, because I wasn't talking to the Higgs at this stage. But the council's position was that ultimately they would not do a deal with a hedge fund in Coventry, and that was it.
Right, I think you've covered some of this, but with the financial fair play 60% rule now in operation in League One, it is clearly crucial for a football club to own its own ground, and it needs to gather more revenue streams in the football club. And the football club needs to own the RICO, given that in the turnover last season on mainly attendance money was circa 10 million. What do you estimate the club would have been able to earn from A, the football-related activities, and B, the non-football-related activities?
Well, on the salary cap, really, you know, the turnover, the percentage that you can spend on player wages in the last season was 65%.
We know this. We know it.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, we'll move on to a question from here. See if you reckon you've heard the answer before.
Sorry, my name's Chris McKinnell, and well done, guys, everybody that's turned up tonight. My main question, which I think is the ultimate question, is why is the club or yourselves so intent on alienating the fans? Because that's what you're doing. Because even 5 years ago, there would have been far more people here than there are now. You're telling us you're going to improve the squad. How can you do that when we're under a transfer embargo? And you just don't seem to be listening. And there are so many people I know who are just saying, "Well, I've had enough now." You know, it's hard.
The thing is, Tim, you'll never win us back. This would have been at the RICO.
Who's going to invest to build a new...
Let me tell you, the gentleman's point in the back there, this would have been at a RICO, it would have been a damn sight more expensive to have it there than it would have here. And that is because...
That's our stadium. Tim, you've lost the fans. You'll never get us back. Well, how are you going to do it?
Is that a statement or a question? So let's all be polite, and now I can answer this lady's question, or the statement, which is, what are you going to do to put things right? Because you're talking about the fact that we're in transfer embargo, and the gentleman behind you said, oh yeah, again, you're absolutely right. For the last 3 years we've been in transfer embargo. It's not a great place to be in. So what we're undertaking to do is get Football Club Limited out of administration. We have lined up the accounts and the BDO to actually come in, produce the statutory accounts, get out of embargo as fast as we possibly can, and that would allow Mr Presley and Waggett to reshape the squad, which is what they want to do.
What about next week?
Okay, great question here.
My name's Gary Galway, and I've been supporting Coventry City, 53 years now, since I was 5 years old. I'd just like to know, you've talked about the RICO and various things, but if we do play Warsaw, which is, you know, what everybody seems to assume, how many fans have you scheduled in? How many have you planned for? What income do you think you're going to get from the few hundred that are going to make the trip? Because I certainly won't be.
And I'm not going.
Nor me. Then after the 3 years, when you eventually build this stadium, this non-league stadium, 12,000 people, which is, you know, what appears to happen, how many fans are you going to have left?
Who's putting the money to build that stadium?
Yeah, and where's the money coming from to do that when you've invested zilch in the club ever since you walked through the door? All we've seen is players go out the door. We've seen no investment. The only time we got players in was last year when we finally reached rock bottom. Well, what I thought was rock bottom, but we're going to go further. Why do you invest in players before that?
I can't, I'm not quite sure where to start with all of that, but with regard to, for example, why didn't you buy players? Well, I can't talk about the previous regimes, but one thing is very clear. last year, and we're going to see it again this year, and possibly the year after, there is an oversupply of footballers. So supply is outstripping demand, not just a little bit, but n-fold. We're talking about in League One. So, for example, we were able to get, and continue to get, players of the class of Leon Clark. I think everybody agrees that he's a very good footballer, and he didn't cost a tanner. What we have to do is we have to underwrite their wages. So it all comes down to the wage bill. At some stage, the pedals may balance, and you may end up actually the demand for footballers outstrips the supply. But at the moment, there are so many footballers on the market. You're seeing so many get released, and that is the effect of financial fair play.
What about the question the gentleman asked about who's going to find the money for the new stadium? Where's that funding coming from?
The money comes from the scheme, which will be developed in and around the stadium.
Who in their right mind would put money into building a ground where there's going to be no fans? Exactly. Who's invested in that? How is that a good business plan?
Well, to answer your question, what we found is, through these forums and through multiple other meetings we've had,
10% of people that are going to travel away to go out.
one of the messages that's come out is this, and I won't just indulge me for 1 minute, and that is, you know what, Tim, I get it. Build it and they will come. I get that. Because I said it.
Okay, let's have some order. Let's hear the finish of the answer, and then we'll move on to the next question. Let's have some order if we can, please.
So the message we've got from fans, and they stood here and they've sent me emails, and we've had calls, all the rest of it is,
10% I'm going to go with you, Tim. Who's putting the money in to build a new stadium with that as a business plan? Anyone in their right minds would be like, that's not a good business plan. Based on the fact that you've lost millions since you've been here. Who's going to back that as a business
Okay,
plan?
that question's been asked. Let's hear the answer.
so as I said, a number of fans said, we get it, we understand you need all the revenues, we understand there's a new stadium. And by the way, it wouldn't be 12,000, I don't know where that number's come from. No, I didn't. I was very clear. I said, you look at the Rotherham model.
Let's have the question. We know the question. We know the question. Let's hear the answer.